Wasn't this supposed to be a battle of the Titans? They were the top two teams in the Canadian division, the North Division going in. The Oilers were only 4 points back. Now they're 10 points back. This was supposed to be the battle of the Titans.
It was, and I think it revealed a couple of things. I think it revealed that you really can't get a sense of how good your hockey team is playing the same 6 teams every day or every other game. You can't get a sense of that. There's 31 teams in the league, and you can't get a good sample size playing just 6. So the Oilers are probably better than 5 of the other teams in this division, and they've shown that so far, and they showed that in February, the way they played. But they're not better than the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're not better than the 6 team. Now, the Toronto Maple Leafs are probably better than the 6 teams in the division, but how good are they against the top teams in the other divisions? That's the thing it's really kind of mysterious in this setup is, yeah, they're a lot better than these 6 teams. Granted, they showed that. They're way better than kind of Ottawa and Calgary and Vancouver and a little bit better than Winnipeg and a little bit better than the Oilers. But are they better than some other teams in their divisions? And the Oilers, by extension, yeah, the Oilers are, they're a lot better than Ottawa. They've shown that. They're a lot better than Vancouver. They've shown that. They're a little better than Calgary. They're probably right up there with Winnipeg, and they're not as good as Toronto. So it's a tough sample size to know where your team actually stands when you're only playing the same 6 teams throughout the entire season. But yeah, the Leafs shown that they're the best team in the Northern Division right now. And that can change. There's still some hockey left to be played. There could be adjustments, things could happen, and that could change. But right now, they're the best team. Will they be the best team in the league come playoff time or come when this is all thing wrapped up? That's another thing to be said because you don't really know how good the other teams in the league are right now. And I think the Oilers, they're still a very good team. They're a good team. They got the 2 best players in the game. I don't think they should be too discouraged by this loss. I think there's a lot of positives there. There are a lot of positives going in. But to me, I see they're a good team that had a bad week, and that's going to happen from time to time.
Have the Maple Leafs figured out how to shut down McDavid and Draisaitl?
Well, I think part of that is staying out of the penalty box. And I think that was one of the big keys for the Maple Leafs going into this series. They went 2 to 3 games, they didn't take a penalty, which is hard to believe against McDavid and Draisaitl. And it wasn't that they didn't take a penalty because the referees were not calling penalties on them. It's because the Oilers really didn't have a lot of penalties. They didn't draw any penalties. And I think what the Maple Leafs did is they said, we got to stay out of the box. That's our number one priority. And they did that. And then they did a really good job of playing the game after they had gone up a couple. They were fortunate. They went up a couple goals in the first couple games. They went up early, and then they were able to kind of play a bit more conservative game. They didn't have to take as many chances. There was not a lot of flow in those games. There was not a lot of odd man rushes back and forth either way, which is the way the Oilers sometimes like to play. They like to trade chances back and forth. So there wasn't a lot of that. And I think that as McDavid and Draisaitl struggled, the more they struggled to find offense, I think the more frustrated they became, and then they try to do things on their own, which happens a lot with star players. Is when they get frustrated, suddenly McDavid wants to take on the whole team by himself. Suddenly Draisaitl wants to do everything by himself. And it's a tough situation, but I think that was part of the problem is that the Leafs did a really good job of keeping a lot of guys behind the puck. They didn't give McDavid a lot of space, but they could afford to do that because they took early leads in those games, and the Oilers were forced to chase them.
And, the series before the Maple Leafs series against Vancouver, I mean, Connor McDavid was shut down quite a bit by the Canucks. And here we have the 3-game series against the Maple Leafs in which, McDavid and Draisaitl are rendered ineffective, essentially. Is there a blueprint being perhaps formulated by the 6 rival teams here? I mean, they're playing each other all the time, and you're getting to know these players. I mean, is that something that's happening?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is because you only have to prepare for 6 teams as opposed to 30 teams. So you go and break down that film and you're gonna see what you're gonna see. It's like preparing for playoff series. You know what may or may not work against certain players, and then you just have to try and stick to that game plan. And I think what Toronto has is they have very effective defense pairings. They don't really have a weak defense pairing. The guys they roll out there are pretty strong. And they have very responsible forwards, that guys that don't cheat, don't take chances. They really kind of play conservative in that regard. They have high-end talent. They do. They have a lot of high-end talent on that team that will score some goals for you, but they're very responsible in their own end. And I think that's one of the keys to playing against McDavid and Draisaitl, is to be responsible in your own end and to take care of the puck and to keep them in their end as much as possible. There's a lot of times in that game where those top lines were pinned in their own end, that the Oilers couldn't break up the cycle, couldn't get the puck, couldn't get control of it, because the Leafs they were working harder and they were winning all the battles.
Obviously, heading into the Maple Leaf series, the Oilers were on a heck of a run. They had gone 11-2 their previous 13 games heading into the 3 games against Toronto. But, like most teams, if not every team, there's ebbs and flows to a season. There's ups and downs. It's like the stock market or the Bitcoin market, if you will. There's it's going like this, right? And are the Oilers perhaps we're on a downward trend, even if we didn't seem like it? I mean, we did come out of the Vancouver series, like I had mentioned, where relatively low scoring games, McDavid was being held in check. In hindsight, could that have been something that, resulted in what we saw here against Toronto?
Well, the Oilers were on a heater, and eventually heaters always come to an end. So I think it was a situation of, well, when is this going to come to an end? You can't win at 9 of 11 all the time. So you can't. Came in 5 in a row. They were playing well, and I think what they were doing is they were winning games different ways. They were winning high-scoring games. They were winning defensive games. They were winning games when McDavid and Draisatl weren't scoring. They were winning games, and those guys were all over the scoreboard. So I think they liked that they were winning different types of games. They were getting adequate goaltending, and they were getting some very, very good goaltending during that streak. So there's ebbs and flows, and you could kind of sense the frustration. I know that they were jacked up and they were amped up for this series. They were really excited to play the Leafs. They're really excited to see where they measured up against this team. And I think as the series went along, the frustration levels kept growing and growing and growing. And once you get to that frustration level, when you can't seemingly do anything, I think that's where the Oilers got that. They came out and it got to a point where nothing was going right for them. They weren't getting a bounce. They weren't getting a break. The puck wasn't, go off a skate and bounce wide, as opposed to before, go off a skate and bounce in past the goalie. So they weren't getting anything in the way of breaks. They weren't drawing any penalties, and they weren't getting many saves. So it's a bad combination. I think just everything just kind of kept piling on for the Edmonton Oilers in this series.
There wasn't a lot of scoring in the 6-1 game, the third game, but that was the game that the line of Draisaitl, Nugent-Hopkins, and Yamamoto was reunited. And last season, they had a lot of latter half of the season success. How did they look?
They looked okay. They had really good chances early on in that game. And I think there is some chemistry there, and I think a lot of people would like to see them reunited. I think a lot of people would like to see that line play a little bit more. But I think when you look at the situation of your top 6, I'm not sure James Neal is a top 6 player anymore, and I don't think he's gonna do well there. Jesse Puljujarvi has cooled off a little bit since having a pretty good little run there. He's cooled off a little bit. He's still a pretty good player, but can he play with Connor McDavid on a nightly basis? And I think you have to find that combination in that top 6. So if you basically stack your second line per se, do you have anything left for anyone to play with Connor McDavid? And obviously it didn't work with James Neal. It's kind of sputtering a little bit with Puljujarvi. Yeah, you want to see that line, but it's a case of not putting all your eggs in one basket. And I think that's what Dave Tippett is looking at. He'd like to see that line together, but if he had someone to play with McDavid, then yeah, we'd see that line together more often. But I think he does want to spread the wealth a little bit, and that's why Nugent-Hopkins usually plays up with McDavid. And McDavid wants to play with players that think they weigh the game the way he does. And I think that's the big thing. You're not going to keep up with McDavid physically with his speed, but he wants you to be in the places that he's expecting you to be when the game is going on. And I think Jesse Puljujarvi is starting to get it. I think James Neal is just not there yet, just because he's missed so much time and he's not necessarily in mid-season form, and obviously he's getting towards the latter end of his career, so I'm not sure that he can play on your top line. But I think that's what Dave Tippett is looking at here. You don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, for say. You don't want to end the production on the first line to get production on the second line. Now, he did this because he wasn't getting production from any lines in the first 2 games against Toronto.